A man in his 30s walks out of his front door somewhere in Europe and starts walking. It takes him months. He sleeps in barns and under hedges. He goes hungry for days at a time. He is robbed at least once, because everybody on that road is robbed at least once. Some of the people who set out with him do not come back, and everybody knows before they leave that some of them will not. And at the end of all of that, he arrives at a building, and he stands in a queue. And what he has come to do, after 800 miles in 4 months and the real possibility of dying on the way, is this. He is going to reach out and touch the tips of his fingers to a piece of glass. And behind the glass, there is a small piece of bone. Now, before I say anything else about that, I want to say one thing, and I want it in your ears before the rest of this video, because everything else depends on you hearing it. That man is not a fool. Nobody walks 800 miles for something he does not love. Whatever else is true about that scene, it is not true that he was stupid or that his faith was small. He gave more for what he believed in 4 months than most of us have given in our lives. If this video ever sounds like it is laughing at him, stop it and do not come back, because I will have got it wrong. What I want to ask is not about him. It is a question about the church that came before him, and it is a strange question because of what is missing. The first Christians had nothing like that. Not one object. Not one. And here is why that is strange, and it is the whole reason for this video. It is not because they did not have the chance. Think about the generation we are talking about. The people who had actually stood next to Jesus were alive and walking around. The place where he was buried was in a city that people went to all the time, and everybody knew where it was. The men he chose died among people who loved them enormously and who would have kept anything. Every single opportunity existed, and there is not one line anywhere in the New Testament about keeping something or displaying something or going somewhere to touch something. That absence is the loudest silence in the book, and today we are going to look at 3 objects, and then at one story in the Old Testament that I think settles the whole question, and it settles it in a way I did not expect. Before the first one, 2 quick things, and then I will not interrupt the scripture again until the end. First, make sure you are already subscribed. This channel is very new and very small, and I will be honest with you about what that means at the end of this video. And second, tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. I read every single one, and on this channel that is not a figure of speech. There are few enough of you that I genuinely read them all. Now, the one thing I want you to carry out the door. The New Testament never tells you to go anywhere, and never tells you to touch anything. Go and check me on that, because it is a big claim and you should not take it from me. Read the letters, all of them, Romans to Jude. They are written to people with real problems, sickness, poverty, persecution, fear, doubt, grief. And not once does any writer tell a struggling Christian to travel to a location, or to obtain an object, or to be present where something happened. Every time the New Testament describes how a person gets to God, the verb is believe, and the place is wherever that person is standing when they do it. Write that down. The verb is believe. The place is here. Now let us look at what we built instead. Number 1, a piece of wood, kept in gold, behind glass, in a place people travel to see. And the promise attached to it is a promise about proximity, that being near this brings you nearer to what happened. And I want to be careful, because there is a real and good instinct underneath this one. We do this with everything we love. We keep a ring. We keep a letter in a drawer. We keep the shirt somebody died in. That is not superstition. That is being human, and God made us that way. But watch what happens when the instinct crosses one specific line. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved it is the power of God. The preaching of the cross, the word, the message, that is where Paul locates the power, in the announcement of what happened, which is portable, which costs nothing, which is available in a prison cell and in a hospital ward and in a language nobody has written down yet. And you can see the difference in one practical test. The message reached every corner of the known world in about a generation. An object can only ever be in one room, and only rich people and healthy people can get to it. A poor woman with a sick child in a village 300 miles away cannot walk to a room, but the message walked to her. That is not a small thing. The New Testament is built to be carried by people who own nothing, and the moment power moves into an object, it stops being available to the people it was mostly written for. Number 2, a bone. And this is the one I told you to stay for, because this is the one with the man in the queue. The promise here is different from the first one, and much stranger when you say it out loud. That holiness belonging to somebody else can travel to you through contact. That there is something left in the physical remains of a person who was close to God, and that touching it, or being near it, puts some of that on you. Now, the Bible does talk about the people we are describing. There is a whole chapter about them, and it is the most famous chapter of its kind in Scripture, and I want you to notice what it tells you to do with them. Hebrews chapter 11. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Rahab. And it goes through them one by one, and it tells you what they did. And the thread through every single one is the same word, by faith. And then verse 13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. They all died in faith. And what does the chapter want you to do with that? Look at how the very next chapter begins. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Let us run. That is the instruction. They are given to you as an example to imitate, not as a substance to touch. The entire point of that chapter is that these people did something you can do too, and the thing they did was believe when it was hard. Nobody in Hebrews 11 is kept. They are all held up. And there is a detail in the Old Testament about this that I think is deliberate, and once you notice it, you cannot unnotice it. Deuteronomy chapter 34. Moses dies. And this is not any man. This is the man who saw the bush, who stood in front of Pharaoh, who carried the tablets down the mountain, who spoke to God face to face. If any human body in the entire Old Testament was going to be kept and honored, it is that one. And verse 6 says, And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth-peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. God buried him himself, and nobody knows where. The most important man in the Old Testament, and God hid the grave. I am not going to tell you that verse proves a doctrine, because one verse rarely does. But I will say this, whatever that is, it is not an accident. It reads like somebody who knew exactly what people do with a grave, and who removed the possibility before it started. Number 3, a place. And this one is the gentlest of the three, and the one I have the most sympathy for. So let me concede something first. Standing where something happened is one of the most human things there is. If you have ever stood in a room where somebody you loved used to live, you know that it does something to you. And it is not superstition, and it is not wrong. I have done it. I would do it again. So this is not a video against travel, or against history, or against feeling something in a place. It is a question about whether God is more available there than he is in your kitchen. And on this one, Jesus answered directly, and he answered a woman who asked him exactly this question. John chapter 4. A Samaritan woman raises the oldest religious argument of her world. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. 2 addresses. Which is the right one? And his answer, in verse 21, does not choose. Woman, believe me, the hour cometh, when ye shall neither in this mountain, nor yet at Jerusalem, worship the Father. Neither. He does not pick the correct address. He abolishes the category. And then verse 23. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. And Paul says the same thing to a city full of temples in Acts chapter 17, verse 24. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything. As though he needed anything. That is the sentence that undoes the whole logic. The entire structure of sacred objects and sacred locations assumes there is something we can supply, and somewhere we can supply it. Paul says God is not short of anything, and does not require delivery. And there is one more thing the first Christians said about all of this, and it is the strangest of the lot, and it is why they never needed any of the three. Because they did have a holy place. They talk about it constantly. It is just not a building, and it is not in a city. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? Ye are the temple, written to a congregation of ordinary people in a port city. People Paul spends most of that letter correcting because they were arguing and drinking at the wrong moment and suing each other. Those people, he calls them the temple, and Peter does the same thing in his letter. Ye also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house. Now put that next to a pilgrimage and look at what it does to the geometry. If the holy place is people, then it moves. It walks home from the market. It sits in a prison. It is in a village nobody has heard of, and in a room with a dying child in it, and on a road with a man who owns nothing. You cannot make a queue for that, and you cannot put it behind glass, and you cannot charge admission to it, which may be exactly why nobody built an industry on it. Now, here is the story I have been building toward, and it is the one that made me sit back in my chair, because it is not the argument I expected to find, because everything I have said so far is an argument from silence. The New Testament does not mention relics. Fine, but plenty of true things are not mentioned. That is a fair objection, and I would make it myself. So let us go to a place where the Bible is not silent at all, where it takes a sacred object with a spotless origin and tells us exactly what to do with it. Numbers chapter 21. Israel is in the wilderness. They are dying of snakebite, and God gives Moses an instruction. Verse 8. Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass, that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. Read that carefully, because we need to be precise about what this object is. God commanded it, not a man's idea, not a compromise with local custom. A direct instruction from God, given to Moses with a promise attached. And it worked. Verse 9, people looked at it and lived. This is not a symbol or a teaching aid. Actual healing actually happened in connection with an actual physical object by God's own arrangement. If there has ever been a legitimate holy object in the history of the world, that is the one. It has better credentials than anything any of us could ever produce. Now come forward about 700 years. 2 Kings chapter 18. There is a king named Hezekiah, and the Bible's verdict on him is unusually warm. The text says he trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah. And here is one of the things the text lists as a reason for that verdict. Verse 4, he removed the high places, and brake the images, and cut down the groves, and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and he called it Nehushtan. Break in pieces. He took the one object in the entire Old Testament that God himself had commanded, that God himself had used to heal people, that had been carefully preserved for 7 centuries, and he smashed it. And the Bible records that as one of the good things he did, and it tells you exactly why. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it. That is the reason. Not that the object was fake, not that it never worked. It worked, and Scripture says so. But it had been kept, and generation after generation had walked past it, and at some point people started bringing incense. And then read the last 4 words, because they are almost funny, and they are the whole point. And he called it Nehushtan. He gave it a name, and the name means, roughly, a piece of bronze. That is all. He looked at the most credentialed sacred object in the history of the world, the one God ordered built, and he named it what it was made of. Now, I want to be exact about what this does and does not prove, because I am not going to overreach. It does not prove that God hates objects. God commanded that one. What it proves is where the danger sits, and the danger does not sit in the thing. It sits in the space between the thing and the person looking at it. The serpent did not change over 700 years. It was the same bronze on the last day as on the first. What changed was that people started bringing something to it. And God's response to that, through a king he commends, was not to explain it better, and not to regulate the incense, and not to put up a sign. It was to break it into pieces and call it metal. If God ever had a policy on this question, that is it. And it is not a warning about bad objects. It is a warning about good ones. Which brings me back to the man in the queue. And I want to finish where I started, gently. He walked 800 miles for something he could have had in his kitchen on the first morning. And I do not say that to mock him. I say it because it is the saddest sentence in this video. He paid 4 months and his health, and quite possibly his life, for access to a room. And the New Testament he could not read because it was not in his language and he could not have read it anyway. Says the access was free and local and already his. And there is a verse for exactly him, and Jesus said it to a man who had insisted on physical proof. John chapter 20, verse 29. Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen. That is a blessing spoken over everybody who would never get access, over everybody too poor to travel, too sick to walk, too far away, born too late. Jesus, in advance, calls that condition blessed, not deprived, blessed. Now, the objections, because there are two good ones, and I am not going to pretend they are not there. The first one is the strongest, and it is the one somebody is already typing. Acts chapter 19. Handkerchiefs and aprons were brought from Paul's body to the sick, and the diseases departed from them. That is real. It is in the book, and anybody who tells you it is not being straight with you. So let us read the whole thing, starting one verse earlier. Verse 11. And God wrought special miracles by the hands of Paul. Special miracles. Luke is the one who marks it. He is writing the account, and he goes out of his way to tell you that what follows is unusual, not the normal pattern, not the standing arrangement, a special case. If handkerchiefs were how the church was supposed to operate, that word would not be there, and Luke would not have needed it. And then follow that same chapter to the end, because it is the same city and the same page. Verse 19. Many of them also, which used curious arts, brought their books together and burned them before all men. The believers in that exact city, in that exact chapter, took the objects they had been using for spiritual power and destroyed them publicly at enormous cost. You cannot take chapter 19 as your relic policy and skip the end of chapter 19. There is a smaller one that comes up alongside it, and it is worth 30 seconds because the answer is just careful reading. Acts chapter 5. They brought the sick into the streets, so that at the least the shadow of Peter passing by might overshadow some of them. Peter's shadow. And people quote that as though the shadow healed people. Read the sentence again and notice what it actually says. It says the people brought them out so that the shadow might fall on them. It is reporting what the crowd was hoping for. It does not say the shadow healed anybody. And Luke, who is normally very precise about who was healed and how, does not follow it with a single case. The next verse says they were healed and gives God no competition for the credit. That is a description of what people expected, not a statement of how it worked. And there is a large difference between those two things, in that chapter and in ours. The other objection is the woman who touched the hem of the garment. And this one has the best answer of all, because Jesus answers it himself. Mark chapter 5. She reaches through a crowd, touches the edge of his clothing, and is healed instantly. If ever a story looked like a garment carrying power, it is that one. And Jesus turns around and says in verse 34, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace. Thy faith. He had a perfect opportunity there to leave the credit on the cloth in front of a crowd. And instead, he publicly and specifically moves it to her and to what she believed. That is Jesus doing exactly what this video is trying to do, 2,000 years earlier and much better. So here is the honest question, and answer it quietly rather than in the comments. Is there something in your life that you go to? Not something you keep. Keeping is fine. Keep your grandmother's Bible. Keep the ring. Keep the photograph. That is memory, and memory is good, and God gave it to us. I need something you go to. Something you would feel a small cold panic about if it were lost. Something you touch before the hard thing. And something you would be uneasy praying without. And if you can think of one, do not throw it away tonight in a burst of feeling. Do something better and slower. Ask it Hezekiah's question. What am I bringing to this? Because the serpent was never the problem. The incense was. And then go and read the 2 passages for yourself, tonight, before you sleep, because you should never take this from a man on a screen. Numbers chapter 21, verses 8 and 9, where God commands it, and 2 Kings chapter 18 verse 4, where a good king smashes it, and the Bible calls that righteousness. 2 minutes. Nobody standing between you and the page. Now, before we close, I need to ask you for something, and I am going to be completely straight with you rather than clever, because this channel is small enough that I can be. I am not going to ask you for money. Some channels have a join button under the video that lets you become a member. This one does not have one yet. It appears when a channel gets bigger, and we are not there. So there is nothing for me to sell you tonight, even if I wanted to. What I am going to ask for costs nothing at all, and honestly, it matters more. Make sure you are subscribed, and turn the bell on with it. Leave a comment and tell me the country you are watching from. It takes 4 seconds, and it tells the algorithm this is worth showing to somebody else, and it genuinely helps a small channel more than you would guess. And press the like button, even if you disagreed with half of what I said. And then the one that actually matters, and I mean this literal. Send this to one person. Not a group, one person. This channel is new, and it is small, and the only thing that makes it exist is somebody sending it to somebody else. There is no advertising, there is no budget, there is nobody promoting it. There is you and one message. That is the entire mechanism, and it is not an exaggeration. That is the whole ask, and I will not bring it up again. The next video I am putting in front of you now is the honest next step from here, because once you start asking what the false church did not have, the obvious place to look is not a museum. It is the room you sit in every Sunday, and there are 3 things in it that no first century Christian would recognize. Go and watch it while this is still fresh, and until then, go and check me. May the peace of Christ, who is not far from every one of us, keep your heart and your mind until we open the world together again.